Hey guys, so guess what? Today is your very last lecture for evolution. So today we're going to be going over cladograms and then we're going to do some quizzing over cladograms. But then next week, all we're going to be doing is reviewing. So I looked at your calendar. You have about 3 to 4 weeks left. We're just going to be reviewing. We're going to do a week on Darwin. That way we could talk about his journey. And basically, we're done. So if you were actually in class, we would have a little mini celebration. So you could celebrate at home because you finished all of your biology materials. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to be talking about something called a phylogenetic tree or a cladogram. And so Darwin had this idea, we've talked about Darwin before, where you had all of these branching organisms and somehow they were all related. And so he was able to think up this little thing called a phylogenetic tree. And so, it's kind of like a tree of life, how everything is just branching and everything is related. So we know now they can get really complex. Spread out. Okay. Sorry, my cat was scratching on the door. All right. So our phylogenetic trees can get really, really complex. And so if you look right here, we have all of these different, kingdoms, all these different classifications, and this looks like a lot, but technically it's not everything. But you can see that most scientists believe that they're all related somehow, and somewhere down here in the middle, we have something that, relates all of them. And so if we think about everything that's living, if we think about our characteristics of living things, everything is made out of cells, they have ribosomes, cytoplasm, things like that. And so that's something that relates all of these organisms together. But we don't have to look at cladograms that are this complex. This is like high-level science stuff. So let's talk about a phylogenetic tree. Okay, phylogenetic tree is also known as a cladogram. Okay, so it's not until you get to like college level science or AP Bio that you need to know the difference between the two. So a phylogenetic tree and a cladogram are branching diagrams that show evolutionary relationships among organisms. Okay, so that's the basis of all of this. You're looking at relationships. So the closer that two branches are to each other, it infers that those organisms are more closely related. So let me go back to that complex one. So if you look right here, all of these on top, okay, so they're all in green, and you can see where they branch off, they're more closely related than it would be to, like, let's say one of these green ones over here to one of the blue ones. Okay, so you have a big branch that goes from green to blue. And so that means that all these green ones are more closely related. All these red ones are more closely related. These blue ones right here are more closely related. Okay, so that's what a cladogram or a phylogenetic tree shows. It shows the evolutionary relationships between two organisms. So let's look at a simple one. Okay, so I told you we're not looking at the complex ones. So here's a simple one. Okay, so we have this little organism over here. It's called a tunicate. Okay, so a tunicate is extremely simple. It's one of the most simple organisms in the world. Doesn't have a backbone. All basically it does, it's an ocean animal, and it sits at the bottom of the ocean and it brings in water and filter feeds and pushes out water because it gets rid of waste. That's all it does. That's the purpose of the tunicate life. And so it's an extremely simple organism. So we actually call this the out group. Okay, the out group is going to be our most simple organism. So if we look right next to that, we have what's called a lancelet. Okay, so lancelets are a little bit more complex. So they can choose what they're eating, okay, but it's basically the same thing. They're going to, scoop in some food, move around, find more food, and then push food out. And you can see right here that it's a cephalochordata. Okay, so what that means, cephala means head, and chordata means that it has a backbone. And so if we compare that to the tunicate, tunicate doesn't have a head. Okay, think of like a sea sponge. Okay, it doesn't have a head, doesn't have a backbone. Okay, so that's something that separates those two. But they're closely related because if we look, those branches are pretty close together. Okay, so next we have a hagfish. So hagfish, if you haven't seen or heard of those, you should look those up. They're really cool. They produce a lot of slime. So hagfish, very simple type of fish. Okay, next we have lampreys. Okay, lampreys are kind of scary looking. You can look those up online too. Okay, and next, if we get more advanced, we have chondrichthyes. So this is our sharks and our rays. Okay, we know sharks and rays are pretty complex compared to a lamprey and a hagfish. Okay, osteichthyes, that's our regular fish. Okay, and then amphibia, reptilia, aves, and mammalia. So my question for you, are reptiles more closely related to amphibians or to birds? Okay, so there's my reptiles, there's amphibians, okay, and there's birds. Okay, so they're more closely related to birds. And that's actually why scientists believe that, dinosaurs and birds are more closely related than, let's say, dinosaurs, and some of our modern day amphibians, even with some of our modern day reptiles. It's kind of weird, right? All right, so if we're looking at a cladogram, there can also be characteristics that show how organisms evolved over time. And so organisms that contain the traits that are listed below them. So for example, okay, so here's my very basic cladogram. I could see I have 4 traits here. I have embryo, vascular tissues. Hopefully you remember what those are. Those are your xylem and your phloem, seeds, and flowers. Okay, so with these traits, it's going to be referring to whatever is after that. Okay, so the only thing that has flowers on this cladogram are my flowering plants. If I backtrack to seeds, okay, so cone-bearing plants and flowering plants both have seeds. Ferns and mosses don't have seeds. Okay, so if you ever look at a fern or if you look at a moss, they actually don't produce any seeds. So if we go a little bit further back than that, okay, vascular tissue, so having that xylem and that phloem. Ferns, cone-bearing plants, and flowering plants all have those. Okay, and then all 4 of these plants have embryos. All right, and then if we go further back, that's the ancestor of all of our plants. So, what trait separates a moss from a fern? Good job, vascular tissues. Okay, and what trait do mosses and cone-bearing plants have in common? Embryos. Good job. All right, so traits can also be placed on the line that leads to the organism. So if I look right here, this is another cladogram, okay, so going from sharks all the way to birds, okay, and you could put whatever you want on these cladograms. So like if you just want to look at a cladogram of fish, it could be all fish, or a cladogram of plants, it could be all plants, okay, kind of like a dichotomous key. So if I'm looking at these traits right here, so I have right here in the middle, I have primates and rodents and rabbits. So if you recall, both of these are mammals, okay, and that's what separates primates and rodents and rabbits from the rest of these organisms that are on this cladogram. And so one of the characteristics of mammals is that they have hair. So we can put hair right here on the branch that leads to these 2 mammals. Okay, so traits can also be on the branches. It's not very often, okay, but the traits, can be on the branches. And when you're constructing a cladogram, you have to try to remember to make it more the most simplistic as possible. So like for example, I couldn't put rodents and rabbits over here and have hair pop up twice. So it's most likely that I have this one branch and then it branches off and hair is right here before that branch, before primates and rodents and rabbits. All right, so just remember with all of this, DNA evidence is the best. This is what scientists like to use. It's the most accurate. You can compare genes, you compare proteins. So for example, on this particular cladogram, they're looking at the number of amino acids that are different from human hemoglobin. Okay, so hemoglobin is on your red blood cells. It causes you to bind to iron, and so it gives you energy, and that way when you're working out, you're not breathing too hard, and it allows your heart to pump, efficiently because you're transporting oxygen all throughout your body. And so if we're looking at hemoglobin, all organisms have hemoglobin because they all need oxygen to perform cellular respiration. And so if we look at this, so our human, okay, so human differences, like doesn't matter if you're, living here, if you were born in Europe, like you'll all have the same hemoglobin, okay, so there's no differences. And so if we compare that to, let's say, a macaque is a type of monkey, and so there's 8 differences. Okay, so 8 differences. So that means that our hemoglobin is fairly similar to macaque. Compare it to a dog, there's 32 differences. Okay, so that means 32 amino acids are different between our hemoglobin and a dog's. Okay, and we can just keep on going. Man, my animals are being very noisy. They know it's your last presentation. All right, so our last thing, common ancestor. This is a species that relates to or more common organisms. So it shows that those resulting species have a common descent. They're related. So for example, okay, here's another very simple cladogram. I'm not even showing animals on this. So I have 3 animals. I have A, B, C. Okay, so animal A, animal B, animal C. So right here, where this little branch is at, okay, that's my most recent common ancestor of animal B and animal C. All right, so I don't know from this cladogram whether this animal is alive. It could be, okay, it could not be. Like, we don't know. And our fossil record is kind of incomplete. So, sometimes, like, we just know something is there, but we're not for certain. And that's one of the reasons why evolution is still a theory, is because we're still missing some pieces of evidence, that completely confirm, that everything is related. And so if I'm looking down here, okay, so where this little intersection is, okay, that's where my common ancestor is for animal A, B, and C. And again, I don't know if that animal's alive. It could be, it could not be. Who knows? We have no idea. All right, so that's it, okay, for evolution. Congratulations, you've completed your year of biology. So go ahead, hop on over to Google Classroom and complete your notes quiz, and then I'll be posting up a quizzes later this week. All right, so if you have any questions, just let me know, and I hope you'll have a great day. Bye.